Welcome back to Hinduism. In this video, we're going to look at Tantric Hinduism. Tantra is named after a series of texts known as the Tantras, and these are esoteric texts. That means that they have a secret teaching that traditionally would be revealed mainly from a master of the teachings to selected disciples or students. So they weren't basically as widely or openly known as the Veda or the Hindu epics, for example, or the Puranas, the devotional texts. One of the things that was distinctive about Tantra, apart from being an esoteric teaching, is that it promised a more immediate or direct path to moksha or spiritual liberation. The conventional view among many Hindus is that moksha can take many lifetimes to accomplish. It really involves a complete transformation of consciousness or the soul. So it could be many years, decades, or even lifetimes of effort. But in Tantra, there was a notion of harnessing the natural powers of the body and mind using some special techniques to accelerate the process of spiritual liberation. So some of the distinctive beliefs and practices of Tantra include things like mantras, sacred words or spells. These are not unique to Tantra. You can see them throughout Hinduism. They are at least as old as the Atharva Veda, the fourth Veda, which has a series of mantras that the priests could say during sacrificial rituals for the gods. But the mantras of Tantric Hinduism are believed to have special power. Many of them are kept secret, only passed down in certain lineages, at least traditionally, before modern times. Mudras are also taught as part of Tantra. These are sacred gestures. You see certain mudras appear just in Hindu and Buddhist iconography. For example, the hand with the palm placed forward, this represents protection or have no fear. But there are essentially secret mudras taught in Tantra that are believed to have a kind of spiritual or magical power to them. Another tantric practice, this one spread more widely throughout devotional Hinduism or bhakti, is the use of yantras. These can also be called mandalas. They're sacred designs, often symmetrical, like the Kali yantra you can see in the picture. So these are abstract geometric designs that often stand for a particular god or goddess, and they can be used as objects of visualization meditation. You can also see mandalas that represent the gods or spiritual entities of the four directions and the center. So they can have a kind of cosmic, symbolic type of aspect to them. The yantras associated with particular gods and goddesses, like this Kali yantra, can often be found in Hindu temples, even if they're not, specifically from a tantric sect. There was some mutual influence between Tantra and Bhakti or devotional Hinduism generally, in part because they developed in the same period in the first millennium CE. So also especially associated with Tantra is the theory of the chakras and kundalini energy. Now, the chakra theory is not unique to Tantra. It's found throughout Hinduism. However, Tantra places special emphasis on working with the energy that's believed to circulate through the chakras. So a chakra literally means a circle or a wheel. This is a center in the body through which prana or breath energy is believed to flow and circulate. So prana can literally mean breath, like the air you breathe in and out of the lungs. But in Hinduism and Buddhism and just Indian culture generally, it can also mean a kind of subtle energy that circulates throughout the body, including the sensations of the nerves, for example, but just other types of vital energy. The theory of the prana and the chakras goes back before Tantra, but they developed it in many of their texts. So there's also a theory of the nadis or channels through which prana flows throughout the body. And kundalini is a term often used in Tantra. It refers to vital energy that's in kind of a material or gross form that is an undeveloped form. and it's pictured as being coiled at the base of the spine, similar to a coiled serpent in terms of just sort of having potential energy, but has not yet expanded or reached out to its full length. So just as a coiled serpent can spring suddenly, the idea behind Tantra is to awaken the kundalini and cause it to rise quickly up the spine through the lower and then to the higher chakras. So there's actually no single theory of the chakras in Hinduism. The diagram at the right that shows the 6 chakras and the Sahasrara or crown chakra at the top, this is just one system, and it dates back to an 11th century text called the Kubjikamata Tantra, but there are other versions of the chakras in Hindu texts that they can differ in number, in name, and in function or traits. So this one became influential because it was adopted by a British Orientalist named John Woodruff, who was the first person to write about kundalini and the chakras for a Western audience. And he popularized this 6+1 or 7 chakra system. Also, you'll frequently see in the West the 7 chakras correlated with the 7 colors of the spectrum of Isaac Newton. That would be red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. However, this association is something that you don't actually see in Hinduism. So it represents a Western idea that was kind of grafted onto the original Hindu chakra theory. You do see theories of chakras being associated with colors, but it doesn't match the spectrum in quite that way. So the modern theory of the chakras that's most common, for example, in modern New Age or just spirituality books, is kind of a blend or a hybrid of Indian and Western ideas. So we should talk about the left hand Tantra. Tantra is divided into 2 main types: right hand Tantra, Dakshinachara, and left hand Tantra, Vamachara. Right hand Tantra is so named because it does not use taboo practices. A taboo means it goes against the norms of a society. Left hand Tantra is actually perhaps the more famous sort, but it's not the most common. Right hand Tantra is actually more common in India. But left hand Tantra involves taboo practices that violate social norms, would be regarded as inappropriate or even immoral or scandalous by most Hindus. So this includes things like handling human remains, such as skulls or cremated ash. You can see the picture on the right is of an Agori. This is a Tantric sect, and this is a sadhu of the Agori sect. Sadhus are basically renunciates who practice a life of asceticism for the sake of salvation. He's holding a skull in his hands. The left-hand tantras will sometimes carry around skulls or other human bones as reminders of their mortality. And another practice is to smear their body with cremated human remains. This is another way of kind of viscerally connecting to death. The point of this is not just to be morbid or goths or something like that. It's to give yourself a direct confrontation with the mortality of your body. And the idea being, at least in part, that you'll overcome the fear of death, no longer be attached to your body, and instead you'll be identifying with what's eternal, like your soul or God. Other example of a left-hand practice is consuming taboo foods or substances like meat, alcohol, cannabis, human corpses or cremated remains, blood, menstrual blood, and so on. See, these things are regarded as impure or vile in Hinduism, or as morally inappropriate. And yet, the idea in left-hand Tantra is that by forcing yourself to literally digest what you might regard as most impure or lowest, you're basically affirming at a deep kind of visceral level the unity of all things. So from the perspective of God or Brahman, the supreme being, all things are one on this view. And so you shouldn't be attached to particular bodies or particular things. They're all creations of Brahman. And then perhaps the most infamous left-hand practice is called maithuna. This is using sexual intercourse for a ritual purpose. And the basic idea here is that the union of a man and a woman in sex is a symbol for the union of the male and female aspects of God, which is typically depicted as Shiva and Shakti, or the goddess, in Hinduism. So let's talk a bit more about the idea of tantric sex. This is also known as tantric embrace. The picture on the right is just of an embracing or amorous couple. This didn't necessarily have tantric significance whenever you see this type of thing in a Hindu temple, but it entered temple architecture around the same time as the development of Tantra. So there was a good possibility of some influence, at least in some cases. Maithuna is a term used in Tantra to mean a ritual sexual union, the act of sex, and Yamala can refer to the tantric couple, the male and the female. So what is this and what's the purpose? It can involve actual physical sex. So it represents the union of the individual soul with God. It also represents the union, harmony, and interaction of the male and female aspects of divinity. So the idea is, if the man and the woman engaging in tantric embrace can actually maintain a meditative consciousness. You're not doing this out of lust. If you do it out of lust, it actually has no spiritual benefit and is regarded as just an ordinary sin, basically. But if you do it in a meditative consciousness, you can actually, at least temporarily, unite with the divine male and female energies. So the idea is to enter the sex act without any lust or attachment. And so the belief is it requires a lot of actual spiritual discipline or training before you can do it correctly. It's actually more common, even among left-handed tantras, to not do actual sex and to have the maithuna ceremony. Instead, it's used as a kind of visualization exercise for meditation or contemplation. So having a kind of imaginative vision in your mind of God and the goddess, Shiva and Shakti, embracing, and this can become the theme of your meditation. And so once again, it's not as if sex is regarded as inherently good in Tantra, much less in Hinduism generally, but there is this kind of highly specific ritual aspect of sex that some tantric practitioners have engaged in historically. Another really characteristic aspect of Tantra is these fearsome or ferocious gods. These are gods that appear almost demonic in form. They're frightening, they're aggressive. So what's going on here? This is basically depicting gods or goddesses as destroyers, but in a kind of ultimately positive way. So there's two senses or two aspects to their destruction. One, they can destroy physical external threats like demons or evil in the world. But they can also destroy things that are happening inside a person's mind. They're destroyers of evil or defiled states of mind, like ignorance, greed, lust, anger, etc. And so the fact that these beings appear threatening or ferocious is really interpreted as the fact that becoming one with God, or letting go of your selfishness or your passions like greed and anger, that actually appears to the ego or to the small self, the unenlightened mind, as a threat. So that fear is actually just a manifestation of ignorance. But if you look at these things that threaten your ego, the things that would cause you to become one with God, essentially, that can be a positive process of letting go of the small self and uniting with or identifying with your eternal soul or the eternal God. So that's the kind of perspective of Tantra of these fearsome deities. Now, the fearsome gods are not only worshipped in Tantric Hinduism, but they're especially associated with Tantra. So one example of a fearsome god is Bhairava, who you can see an image of on the right. This is regarded as an aspect of Shiva. So Shiva can manifest as Bhairava, and he's regarded as a destroyer of fear, greed, lust, and anger. You'll notice that the image of Bhairava is pretty gruesome. He's holding a severed hand, a severed demon head. He's wearing a mala or garland of heads. These would actually be the heads or body parts of demons. So he's not like he's going around killing innocent people. It's more of a targeted, directed, focused anger on evil. So another way that Bhairava can appear is his 8 manifestations called Ashta Bhairavas. And that's a kind of common pattern, especially with Tantric gods. They can appear in numbered sets of 7 or 8. So another example of a fearsome goddess is the Matrikas. These are mother goddesses that usually appear in groups of 7 or 8, where they're known as the Sapta Matrikas or the Ashta Matrikas, respectively. And these can be both fearsome and protective. So they're ferocious to evil and to the enemies of Dharma, but they're protective of their followers or worshippers. So it's kind of like this mother goddess who has these 2 aspects, can be ferocious or like a guardian and protector, depending upon your relationship. You can see in the image of the Matrika Chamunda on the right, she is also wearing a garland of human heads and is kind of surrounded by some skeletons. So this use of frightening, even horrific imagery in Tantra, but it's basically used to try to shock the ego or the small self out of complacency. So you can kind of look at the commonality of the use of this dark imagery and some of those taboo practices, right, that are regarded maybe as threatening to the ordinary self and maybe to the conventional norms of society, but they're being used for a higher spiritual purpose. They're ultimately supposed to be affirming of the soul and affirming of God. The most famous tantric goddess is Kali. She's also worshipped by non-tantric Hindus, just ordinary followers of bhakti or devotional Hinduism. She's a manifestation of the wrath or anger of the goddess Durga. She's regarded as the goddess of time, change, power, and destruction. Time because it does result in loss and the destruction of all things. So there's this kind of aspect of the cycle of time that can appear very threatening to the self or ego, but once again, this is supposed to be taken upon as kind of like a lesson. Because everything is finite, you're going to lose everything with the passage of time. You should identify with eternal things instead. And like the Matrikas or mother goddesses, Kali can be both a protector and a fearsome destroyer of evil. So that's it for this video. In the next video, we're going to look at the main schools of Vedanta, Hindu philosophy based on the Upanishads.